I think the rub is you have on the entrepreneurial mindset is one that is incredibly positive, incredibly optimistic. And so we're always assuming that everything is going to work out, that everything's going to be great, that everything's going to be up and to the right. That is the general assumption of most entrepreneurs. If it weren't, you would never get into business because let's face it, it's kind of a ludicrous activity. I mean, there's a fair bit of risk, a lot of walking very thin ropes without a net. So you've got to be incredibly optimistic to be an entrepreneur. I think because of that, a lot of non-entrepreneurial types, so a lot of operational types, certainly a lot of finance and accounting types, feel like it is their job to be a foil to the natural entrepreneurial optimism. And they somehow think that what they are doing is good to basically offset the rosy picture with the here's the worst case scenario picture.
Hey everybody, we are here with another episode of Business Lunch with your host, my counterpart, Ryan Deiss. Hey Ryan, how you doing?
Good, buddy. How you doing?
Good. And myself, Roland Frazier. We are going to talk about one of the most fascinating, cutting edge, insightful, exciting, exhilarating topics that either Ryan or I could think of to talk about: accounting today. Accounting. Welcome to...
You got to set this up a little better than that because we're going to lose literally all the listeners. Why do you want to talk about accounting and finance? Because you're like, for the record, for everybody listening, Roland told me, he's like, yeah, I know exactly what I want to talk about on that podcast today. I was like, oh, cool. You seem so excited. And right before we go live, you're like, yeah, it's accounting and finance. I'm like, what the hell? Like, I don't even want to be here right now. So why do you want to talk about this? What's going on and why does it matter?
Because I think that how you work with your CFO can be a positive or negative experience for the entire culture of the company. And having recently had a 10 years of reporting that I just couldn't stand anymore come to a head on one of our companies that we have and another company where the accountant, we went through some interesting challenges as we were talking about converting to GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, to be in GAAP compliance so that we could be a better exit candidate when we want to sell the company. And we changed accounting methods from cash to accrual, and it had impact. And I just wanted to talk about it because it's very easy to let the tail wag the dog when it comes to accounting. And I want you guys to know that you need to be vigilant about that not happening. And so I'll tell the story that Ryan and I have experienced for way too long, way too long, that finally just got the better of me. And, was like, come on, let's change this. It's completely unhelpful. So our accounting did not have in these companies really a budget. I mean, not a thought out budget. It had like ideas of what we thought things were going to be, but not a good formal budgeting process. And the report that we received daily for 10 years plus was always pretty much in the red because it assumed that all of the expenses that were going to come, which is helpful to know what are the expenses that are going to come, but it's not helpful to continually feel like you're losing. And the reason that it continually felt like we were losing is because it didn't include any projections for any income. So it was basically, if we look forward as much as 60 days, by the way, and we disregard the savings that we've got, and we only look at the cash flow that we've got right now in our operating accounts, and we pay all of the expenses and have no income but don't get to draw on savings,
including, by the way, no new income from existing subscriptions, monthly recurring revenue, accounts receivable.
None of the historical income.
Yeah, not even income that has already been sold that we would expect to arrive in the period. Definitely no new income that we would expect to generate as a result of just business efforts. None of that was included. It was none of the good, and it was all of the bad.
So it was nothing but depressing. And we talked about it a few times and talked with our accounting person about it, and it just never did get changed. And I finally hit the breaking point last week because it was like, oh, we're opening up the next 60 days and look, you're even more in debt. And I'm just like, but we're not. This does not accurately at all present our financial position. And so let's get off our asses and put the frickin' numbers that we expect and the ones we know are going to come in there. By the way, these particular businesses are heavily income loaded to the back because of how things got sold on recurring. So like the last week is the one where most of the cash comes in. So my first thing is be careful because, and Ryan, I would love for you to speak to how you feel about this too, but I was just mad every time I opened that, and I would disregard it and just not open it for 2-3 weeks, which is not a healthy way to keep track of what's going on with the business because it was unhelpful. Not only did it not include the income that was expected and historical, but it didn't tell me really with any great specificity what I could do about anything. So it was just basically an exercise in depression every day when I looked at it, which was typically the morning. And so I just stopped looking at it. And then I happened to open it again, it was like 2 weeks ago. And I was like, I got to look at this stupid thing. And it was with the message of, oh, we're opening up expenses into this now. And I'm like, no more. So it's changed now, and it includes forward-looking things and things that we expect to come in so that it's not the completely depressing picture. Ryan, your thoughts?
I think the rub is you have the entrepreneurial mindset is one that is incredibly positive, incredibly optimistic. And so we're always assuming that everything is going to work out, that everything's going to be great, that everything's going to be up and to the right. That is the general assumption of most entrepreneurs. If it weren't, you would never get into business because let's face it, it's kind of a ludicrous activity. I mean, there's a fair bit of risk, a lot of walking very thin ropes without a net. So you've got to be incredibly optimistic to be an entrepreneur. I think because of that, a lot of non-entrepreneurial types, so a lot of operational types, certainly a lot of finance and accounting types, feel like it is their job to be a foil to the natural entrepreneurial optimism. And they somehow think that what they are doing is good to basically offset the rosy picture with the here's the worst case scenario picture. And I think to a certain extent they're right. But as with everything else, it's got to be kept into balance. So what we never want is somebody who is in charge of accounting and finance to tell us what we want to hear. You cannot have that. At the same time, if it's only doom and gloom, if it's only the worst possible version of the story, not only is it incredibly depressing, and do entrepreneurs, and I appreciate you acknowledging, like, I just stopped looking at it, right? Because I think that this is the reason that a lot of entrepreneurs don't get into finance and accounting, because it's intimidating and because it's ultimately a little bit depressing. And so they'd rather just bury their head in the sand. And that can be really destructive. So number one, it's depressing, but number two, it's also inaccurate. Like what we were looking at was inaccurate. And in many cases, it was causing us to panic a little bit and say, like, oh, we need to pull some rabbits out of a hat and, make some stuff going because we're going to be in the red, when no, we're not. No, we're not. Now, we've been doing this long enough that we sort of had started to adjust, have our own mental adjustments based on, those numbers. But I do believe that the biggest lesson is, entrepreneurs, business owners, it is your job to figure out how do we do budgeting? How does our accounting process work? And to partner with your accounting and finance people to produce numbers and results that, number one, you understand, number two, are accurate and allow you to make decisions. Because if you just live in your bubble and they just live in theirs, you're going to have what we have had. And it's because none of us just wanted to just suck it up and have the conversation about these particular companies. I think we were all just tired. So that's, I guess, my take.
I think one of the things as an entrepreneur, I know I am guilty of it, and I suspect you are too, is when I come up against an obstacle that, certainly if it's an obstacle that repeats itself, or I find someone to be unhelpful, my immediate tendency is to go around it and not through it. and to just basically say, that's dead to me. So this accounting person is dead to me. They're not helpful. I'll get the information I need to run the business a different way. That's also kind of lazy and irresponsible, because you should support the team that you've got to get the results that you need, or you need a different team, is the true, thing that the manager wants. But at least in that one, I have the excuse of, I'm not really the CEO. So, I can talk about it and say, this is not helpful. And so I stopped looking at it, not to bury my head in the sand, which I do think is a risk for people, but I stopped looking at it because it wasn't helpful. Yeah. And so I went around it to get the other information that I needed, and just basically said, this thing is sitting out there. And I did talk about it, in fairness to me, about 5 times over the 10-year period, saying, this is terrible. And we just never did anything about it. But
yeah, and in fact, I was saying, in fairness to the leadership team over there, because neither you or I are CEOs of this particular group of companies. They did actually create a budget. They did work out a framework for a new reporting process. It was never implemented, and that CEO also just kind of got frustrated and was like, I'm just going to do my own. Like, I'm going to be looking at my own numbers. I'm going to be going to the P&L. I'm just going to ignore that report for the same thing. It's like, I've got it.
We're wasting accounting resources to prepare the report that nobody looks at.
Exactly. And then ultimately, and I think this is the problem, and this is where it is very, very important as a business owner, as a CEO, that you realize and acknowledge that these people, they work for you.